Welcome to Question Time. Tonight we're in Canterbury. On tonight's panel, Greg Hands, the government's Minister for Energy and Clean Growth, previously a minister under David Cameron and Theresa May. Emily Thornberry, Labour's Shadow Attorney General for England and Wales, formerly Shadow Foreign Secretary on Jeremy Corbyn's front bench. Spiritual leader of the Anglican Church, ordained after a career in the oil industry. And since 2012, Archbishop of Canterbury, the Most Reverend Justin Welby. Zing Tsjeng, podcaster, author of the Forgotten Women series of books and editor-in-chief of Vice UK. And journalist, former Labour Party member and columnist for the Mail on Sunday, Dan Hodges. Good evening. Welcome to the panel. Welcome our audience here in Canterbury. Great to see you. And, of course, welcome to you at home. Do join in the programme in the usual way on social media at BBC Question Time. And let's hear what you've got to say. Right, let's kick off with our first question tonight, which is from June Sharp.
We urgently need to reduce energy bills and limit climate change. Is the government's energy strategy too little, too late?
Emily Thornberry.
Well, yeah. But, you know, what I could do is, and Greg and I could kind of perform this dance, you know, he could say to me that, I don't know, that we weren't sufficiently in favour of nuclear early enough. You know, 97 we weren't in favour, although we were by, you know, 2005. I could say to him, you know, you cut the subsidies when it came to onshore wind and solar, and you should have done more. Indeed, you should have done more to make sure that we retrofitted houses. So, because it's all very well, you know, warming up a house if it all goes out the window. You know, you need to make sure that we bring people with it and we subsidise and we make sure our houses are properly looked after. And I don't think either political party over the last few years has done sufficient on this issue. And that's the truth. So I was kind of looking forward to this review. I was thinking that maybe you'd come up with something, but you haven't. You know, you talk about nuclear power stations a long time ahead, but what are we going to do in the meantime? Yes, offshore wind is a success. Both parties, you know, can take their hats off and say, actually, that was down to us. But when it comes to all the other things that need to be done, you haven't done it. And we've run out of time. And this is a serious matter, and there's a great deal of rhetoric. You know, if only we could warm the houses with the hot air coming out of the Conservative Party at the moment when it comes to what a great deal this is. But actually, it isn't, and it's not. You've not done enough. And you know, let me just take the example of onshore wind. If you want to do something quickly and fast, you want to do something cheap, you want to do something effective, start having onshore wind farms. Start having solar power, but start onshore wind farms. And what they've done is not only have they cut the subsidies, but they've also changed the law so that it just takes one person to object to a wind farm, and the wind farm is stopped. And they're not going to change the law, and they're not going. I mean, so they say, oh, we're going to try and encourage communities.
So Labour would have more onshore wind farms even if people did object.
But you see, you know, there's this thing that goes around where people say that onshore wind farms are not popular. But the polling shows that 80% of the population actually think that wind farms onshore are a good thing. There is a good...
Or even if they're right next to them.
Yeah, and those that live near them actually seem to approve of them more. Now, that's what the polling says. And I think that the silent majority are ignored far too often on this issue. And the majority want us to do something about climate change and make sure that we cut the bills.
Dan.
I mean, I would agree with, to an extent, with what Emily said. I mean, I think the first thing we have to do is we have to be honest. We have to stop describing what we've seen today as an energy strategy. It's effectively a panic measure in response to what is perceived to be the cost of living crisis, and obviously to another extent Putin's invasion of the Ukraine. And I thought you know, what the person who let the cat out of the bag was Kwasi Kwarteng, who today I understand was asked, insisted, you know, people will see the benefits of this very, very quickly. Was then asked what very, very quickly meant, and he said within 3 or 4 years. Now, I'm not sure that's what most people's idea of quickly is. I think partly the problem is that this debate has been wrapped up in political ideology. I mean, certainly, you know, just within my lifetime, we've had a situation where we had to move away from a dependency on oil. I understand the Prime Minister has said we're about to get a North Sea oil renaissance as a result of this strategy. I remember when people were insisting we had to move away from nuclear power because nuclear power wasn't seen to be safe. We're now apparently getting a nuclear power station every year. I'll believe that when I see it. I think Emily, to an extent, has, and I thought it was very sort of quite bold what Emily said about, you know, we need to go ahead with wind energy, but that is going to require courage and maturity from politicians of all sides. Because it's great, Emily is saying today, well, we need this, and people shouldn't be able to object. But when the Labour Party sees the polling in certain constituencies showing this, it could be an issue that could win them the seat. It'd be very interesting to see if the Labour Party sticks to that commitment. So, but I think fundamentally we are going to have to actually implement, as I say, something that resembles a strategy, and not what seems to be a sort of to use that phrase, a sort of a whack-a-mole approach to what is perceived to be a current crisis.
Well, June, what's your view? You asked the question.
My view is simply that we have run out of time. We need to be decarbonising our housing stock now, because to do so, we would be reducing energy bills for people that desperately need not to have to make those choices, whether to have heating or whether to have hot food. And this, you know, we're coming up to summer, but winter's, to quote Game of Thrones, winter is coming. But also, we also need to be saving the planet. You know, I mean, the war in Ukraine will look like a stroll in the park compared to the famine and starvation and the wars that will happen if climate change actually goes beyond the 1.5 degrees that we're already destined to achieve.
And the man next to you.
Going back to what the solution is, really, to the energy crisis, there's billions of pounds being paid out to shareholders constantly over the last, I think the figure's £200 billion over the last 11 years. Why is the government not regulating that? And surely Labour should be implementing that as well. Why are working class people and people from all social classes having to pay for this energy crisis? Why?
And you're talking about the shareholders of the energy companies?
Yeah.
Well, Archbishop, as a former oil man yourself, in days gone by. You know, at least you've been in that industry at one stage. I mean, I don't know, what's your view on that?
Well, I agree with what June was saying. You have to... It is ridiculous that companies can make excessive profits. There's no windfall tax, that kind of thing. But I think that's slightly missing the picture. What June was saying is it's a global crisis and that we need to do our bit. And also, we have to make sure that other countries do theirs, because otherwise it's like trying to stop a flood coming in through the front door, but you leave your back door wide open. We had a meeting last week of the heads of the different provinces of the Anglican Communion, representing about 145 countries around the world. Climate change for them isn't a future thing for many of them. They're already seeing conflict growing very rapidly through desertification. They're seeing floods. They're seeing complete changes in the pattern of rainfall. That is going to drive migration, and that is going to drive more conflict and stop people dealing with climate change. And we have the needs that we see in the church through food banks and through the many things we're involved in with people who are the least well paid in this country, who are facing real problems with paying their heating bills, and it'll be worse next winter and the winter after that.
So the question is the government's energy strategy too little, too late?
I don't think it's too little, too late. I think it's a good long-term energy strategy in some ways, but what's going to happen in the short term? We need to decarbonise now. That means subsidies for people to insulate their homes and to care for those who have the least capacity for care for themselves.
OK, let's hear a bit more from our audience. So the woman there with the blonde hair and glasses.
So the IPCC report came out earlier this week, just before the so-called strategy, saying that we have to decarbonise now if we want to mitigate climate change, and that we have to phase out fossil fuels. So what I'd like to know is, when will the government stop approving oil rigs?
Greg.
Well, thank you. I think actually today what we launched was a long-term energy strategy, which lays out in three main planks how we're going to deliver on renewables, The UK already has Europe's largest installed offshore wind capacity, for example. We are number one when it comes to offshore wind. On top of that, we do more onshore wind than we do offshore wind. We're in a good place on renewables, but we need to go further and we need to go faster. Secondly, we need to do more on nuclear. Nuclear will provide the base load. It's homegrown energy, low carbon energy. And the third area is actually on oil and gas. And with respect to the last questioner, she is right that we are taking action and moving to net zero. And the UK has actually done more to decarbonise than any other G7 economy in the last 30 years. Our emissions are down by 44% in the last 30 years. But at this time, we don't want to be increasing our import of hydrocarbons from abroad, particularly from Russia. Thankfully, we are in a good position on that. We produce 50% of our gas from the UK continental shelf. We import less than 4% on Russia. I don't want us to be increasing the amount of energy we are importing from Russia or countries like Russia at the moment. That is why oil and gas is part of an important transition.
And what's likely to happen with fracking? Because fracking was something that you yourself said had no place, really, in the British economy. But now the government has gone back to the British Geological Survey and asked them to look again at it.
We've asked on fracking to keep our options open. I think fracking is, we've asked to see if the science has changed. We've put a pause on fracking in 2019. We've asked to see if the science has changed. Can I just come back to the point about bills, though? Because that's the other really important part of what we're dealing with tonight. And the Chancellor of the Exchequer launched a really important package in February, just 2 months ago, to deal with the rise in bills. Cannot deal with it completely, but actually £9 billion set aside, a £200 discount on energy bills, a £150 discount on council tax, additional funds to make sure the most vulnerable are able give them assistance in paying their energy bills.
£200 is, of course, a loan.
It's not a loan. It is a discount, which will then be taken back in the form of a levy.
You're not being given it, you have to pay it back.
No, not necessarily the individual. It gets taken back at the point at which it is levied. Yeah,
sorry, you're all shouting something. What are you all shouting?
I'm saying it's a loan.
It's not a loan.
It's a loan. That's what you're hearing from the
audience. No, it's taken back through a levy. It's not a loan because it doesn't create an obligation on the individual to repay. It is actually a levy on the price point at which the bill.
But they still have to pay it back. What's the difference?
It's put on the price point, not on the individual. The individual does not have an obligation to repay.
Oh, so we can say we don't want to. If we don't want to pay it back, we don't have to.
No, I'm not saying that. It's taken back. It's taken back at the point at which it is charged. Yeah?
So if you don't heat yourself, if you don't have any heating afterwards, then you don't pay it back.
It is not an obligation.
Is that it?
Importantly,
that is it, isn't it? That's what you're saying.
Okay. It comes in this October. And these are the important things that we've announced to help people with bills. But that's different to the long-term strategy that we've launched today with renewables, nuclear, and making sure we're not increasing our imports of oil and gas.
I'll come to you in a second. There's lots of hands up. Let me just have a quick whiz around. The man here on the corner in the grey top there, yes.
Emily mentioned the planning process for onshore wind, which I think David Cameron brought in the restriction that if one person votes against it, you can't get planning permission. Are the nuclear plant stations planned going to follow the same process? Because I would imagine most people would prefer wind to nuclear next door to their house.
OK, well, let's find that out in a minute. The woman behind you, yes.
So on the fracking side of things, I understand with the Ukrainian situation, the desire to shore up our fuel. But if that goes through, what is the longer-term plan to actually bring that back down and shift to renewables as quickly as we should do?
OK, and the woman at the back there in the glasses.
Don't patronise us. It is a loan, for a start. We don't need to be patronised anymore. The truth of the matter is, I live in a rural community with an oil tank. It is very expensive. I want to go green. I can't afford to because all the utilities have doubled, which means VAT has doubled, where is that money going? Why can't we get some sort of grant or something from the extra VAT you're raising to at least do some insulation, something quick? But I don't know how I can even begin to get an oil tank out of my back garden. I'm a single parent. I can't afford it. There's nothing left in my purse.
OK. The man here in the blue top, yes.
The strategy doesn't talk about tidal generation. The tide comes in and out twice a day. And offers an almost endless opportunity to generate electricity.
OK, and of course we're not that far from the sea here in Canterbury.
Indeed.
Zing.
Look, I think what a lot of audience members have picked up on is the fact that this energy strategy is a short-term answer to a short-term problem. You know, we have to reduce our dependency on Russian fossil fuels, but the long-term problem is the climate crisis. One woman in the audience here mentioned the IPCC report. It warns that we have 3 years to drastically reduce emissions lest we face a 3-degree warming across the planet. And you know, we're in Canterbury today. In the decades to come, it's highly likely that some parts of Dover might be underwater because of rising sea levels. We need something that stops the problem right now. And it occurs to me, like many people in the audience have already mentioned, insulation is one of the cheapest, quickest, and most effective way for people to both cut their energy bills and also to save on energy. So why hasn't that been part of the government strategy?
Okay. Man there in the T-shirt, in the middle. Yes, do you want to stick your hand up so we can find you? Yes, there you are.
You said about the £200 rebate, which we're going to have to pay back in £40 instalments, but the cost of living isn't going down, it's going up. So we're getting a short-term slight benefit, but it's not as if we're going to have £40 more next year to pay our loan back.
Okay, and the man next to you.
Ed Miliband was on TV this morning saying how much billions they were going to put, excuse me, put into nuclear energy. The money's going into the wrong things. The one thing that's missing from this whole scenario is honesty, the gentleman said earlier. There's no honesty about the technology that's being used. It's 100 years ago, Nikola Tesla downloaded electromagnetic energy from the sun. It was suppressed by a banker. It's the bankers, when you look at COP26, it was all about the bankers investing in the green eco. It's the bankers that have been holding us back because of their investments. And we need to start looking at new technology. So where's the money coming from that's going to support innovative, disruptive technology? The Labour Party did it in the past. Ed Miliband was one of the people who undid it because people weren't taking it up. But the innovation programmes that they put together were being run by experts. Disruptive technology doesn't have an expert because by definition it's new. These people were blocking disruptive technology moving forward, like the EM energy that we could all be using. A unit powering your house would be about that big, it would be in your house and it'd be completely independent.
Emily, you wanted to come in there.
I just wanted to say that, just in terms of money, what we were saying in the Labour Party is that we would spend £28 billion on a green fund, that we would spend £6 billion on insulating homes. Because as I said earlier, it's all very well being able to heat up your home, but if it goes straight out the window, then what is the point? We need to make sure that we're insulating homes, and we could do that now, and we could do it quickly. And frankly, when the government, when Cameron said, I'm going to cut the green crap, which is what he said, and they stopped putting money into helping people on low and medium incomes to insulate their homes, they stopped. I think it was, I've got some numbers here, I think it's 9 million homes would have been insulated if we hadn't cut it, if the government hadn't cut it, which would mean there would be £170 a year saved by those homes because their homes would be warmer. You know, this is the real life stuff. You know, these are the decisions that have been made, and they've been made wrongly. And OK, so, you know, it's in the past, but let's do it right now. Okay. So why is it that we don't have a policy now that doesn't include insulating homes?
Well, Greg, as well as that, just let me remind you, come back to the woman over there who's asking if there is a nuclear, a small modular nuclear reactor or a massive station, whichever it is, going to be built in the air, can one person object as they can currently with a wind turbine? And that will be the end of it. And also, what about the woman back there who was talking about, you have an oil tank, you were saying, and you'd like to go green, but you can't afford to do so?
Well, heating oil, you're right, there is pressure on prices on things like heating oil, you're absolutely right. There is a very competitive market out there in terms of the number of different companies that it operates in a different way to providing energy through the mains. There is a competitive market out there, but I'm very much with you in terms of the difficulties that people are having paying those high heating oil prices. I think in terms of the other questions, Fiona, if I may, there's sometimes, if you like, put up this kind of false choice between being green and being good for our energy security. And actually, the answer is the same for both. The answer is more renewables, going back to the IPCC report. The answer is actually more nuclear as well, which is very low carbon.
And on that, the question about objections, there's one question specifically about that. If it was you, sir, was it? Forgive me. If one person objects, is that enough? I
think generally the way nuclear works in this country is that nuclear power plants will be in places where they will be desired by local people because they're typically the places that have had nuclear power plants before. So the announcements today of the 8 sites, for example, Wilfer, for example, Hartlepool, these are all places with a long nuclear tradition, sometimes going back to the 1950s. There's areas with strong popular support for nuclear power in those places. But going back to the central point here is that actually climate change and action on the climate, going back to the IPCC report on Monday, it goes hand in hand with increasing, enhancing our energy security. We need energy that is homegrown and home-blown. You know, our offshore wind capacity, our onshore wind capacity, we've got more onshore wind than offshore wind. We've got more solar. We are doing this, pushing all of this through, and today's energy security strategy will help to move that further in that same direction of a low-carbon, energy-secure future.
OK. I'm going to move on, take another question, if I may. Just before, I just want to tell you where we'll be after the Easter break. We'll be back on the 28th of April, and we'll be in Romford, and the week after that we'll be in Walsall. So you've got a bit of time to apply, but if you'd like to be in our audience, go to the Question Time website, Romford or Walsall, and follow the instructions there, and we'd love to see you on the programme. OK, let's take another question now from Dean Cook.
Apart from Europe going to war or applying more sanctions, how can Russia be held accountable for the horrific war crimes being committed in Ukraine?
I mean, certainly we are seeing image upon image upon image, and that's only what we're being allowed to see of what's happening in Ukraine. Archbishop.
One of the lasting memories I have is having spent 20 years on mediation in trying to mediate and bring peace in various war zones around the world, was standing beside a mass grave, having to consecrate a mass grave with the bodies of those who've been killed at my feet in a town where 3,000 bodies were still left unburied in 50 degrees of heat.
And where was this out of
South Sudan, in 2014. And when you do that, the first thing you recognise is you never deal with war crimes until the fighting stops. So the first priority has to be pressure and encouragement to bring a ceasefire. And that is an absolute priority, because while the guns sound, nobody is going to deal with war crimes. And the second thing is that if you're going to have justice, it will take a long time, as it has with Bosnia and Darfur's kicking off again at the moment. But we're forgetting about so many of these. And the third thing, particularly with Ukraine and Russia, is the longer it goes on, the worse the war crimes get. Wars get harder, more horrible, more cruel, more foul with every day that passes. And it seems to me that, yes, we have to investigate the war crimes. We have to make sure that people are held to account, either publicly or, best of all, in a court. But first of all, we have to get a ceasefire, and that has to be the top priority. Because at the heart of this, it's not the rulers. They will be held to account by, as a Christian, you'd expect me to say, they'll be held to account by God, if not before. But I also have been with the victims often enough in enough places to know that they're the ones who matter at the moment. We go for the people who are suffering and try and stop the suffering before it gets worse. And that's going to mean sanctions, but it also means diplomacy. And sadly, it often means negotiating with people who have done pretty unpleasant things.
Dan, Russia tonight has been voted off the UN Human Rights Council. I mean, will that make any difference? Does that take us any further forward?
No, of course not. Of course it won't make any difference. I mean, I think that underlines the weakness of the council. The fact that it was on it or Russia could be on it in the first place. We need to be honest. The reality is Vladimir Putin is not going to appear in front of any form of criminal tribunal to account for his actions. I have complete sympathy with what was understood, but the reality is we cannot simply wait for Vladimir Putin to have an accounting with his God. We need to act now. We need to have, in my view, urgent, and by urgent I mean a matter of days, not weeks or months, independent verification of the scale of the atrocities and war crimes we have all seen on our TV screens. But if they are verified, and I fear they would be, then we have to act, and we have to act directly. We have to, at a minimum, obviously, give the Ukrainians the weapons required to defend themselves. I think,
would you include in that fighter jets?
Yes,
tanks?
absolutely, absolutely, without question. I mean, I would go further. I would say now this is of a scale, or appears to be of a scale, that we now need to introduce a no-fly zone, and we need to look at introducing safe havens so that the atrocities stop. And I completely understand those people who express concern, and obviously there are very real risks and there are very real dangers in taking that approach. But I also think we now need to think about the risks of not intervening. And I mean that in terms of, in a practical sense, not just in a moral sense.
And what do you think those risks
Well,
would be?
if what we are currently saying as a result of our stated policy is, because let's be honest, why we're not intervening because we are scared of Vladimir Putin, right? What we are saying is,
well, it's a nuclear power.
No, that's exactly the point. That's exactly the point I'm making. What we are literally saying is, to any dictator or potential dictator, if you secure a nuclear weapon, you can effectively operate outside of the norms of international law. We are also saying you can effectively, with impunity, invade a sovereign state. And we also, as we now know, are saying you can, with impunity, use rape, use torture, use genocide as a weapon of war. And I'm sorry, but the idea that living in a world that abides by those rules, we are in some way making ourselves safer, is a fantasy. Now, we said at the end of the Second World War, never again. We said after we saw the atrocities in Bosnia, never again. We said after we saw the atrocities in Rwanda, never again. Sooner or later, we are going to have to say never again and actually mean it.
Let's hear from these two men in the front. Yes, Euston.
I would like to say thanks for clarifying what actions do need to be taken, because I feel like a lot of the stuff you see in the news lately is all action from the government, and the news is actions need to be taken, sanctions have been put forward. But it's never actually explained to us what actions need to be taken or what sanctions have been put forward. So I just want more clarification from our government and our news what we need to do and what we are doing to prevent, because otherwise it's just, it feels like we're lost in this entire...
powerless.
Yeah, powerless.
Yes.
I don't think it's just necessarily a fear of Vladimir Putin. I think a lot of the time it's a fear of Boris's mouth. I think, let's be honest, Boris, with his history of getting involved with various dictators, has led to things like a prison sentence extension for Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. It's not necessarily that people don't want to help. I think one thing that we could definitely do is accept more Ukrainian refugees. That's a way without Boris going in, guns a-blazing, as if he is someone that, let's be honest, is someone that we can particularly trust, especially given the circumstances with Partygate.
Just to pick up on that, I agree there's so much more that can be done to help the Ukrainian people, particularly the Ukrainian people who have already fled the country. Only 1 in 10 Ukrainians who have a valid visa to come here have actually arrived in the UK. That is shocking. The refugees minister from the Tory party came on air this week and described it as embarrassing. I mean, we are an outlier in Europe in that we are the only country that is forcing these people fleeing war to come to us with reams and reams of paperwork to try to process them through a bureaucratic process when all they've done is flee war with, in many cases, just the clothes on their back. And the reason why a lot of these people haven't arrived in the UK yet, even though they've got visas, is the Home Office is somehow deciding to process applications individually. So you could be a family of 5 people. You could all apply for visas. Your 4-year-old child could get the visa approved, but that means nothing if the rest of you can't get a visa. So the Home Office desperately needs to rehaul what it's doing right now to help Ukrainian refugees, because it simply isn't acceptable. And as you so eloquently proved, there's a huge amount of goodwill from the British people to try and help Ukrainians
Zing,
now.
in terms of the question, how can Russia be held accountable for the horrific war crimes being committed in Ukraine? What do you make of what Dan had to say?
Well, I think it's a confusion of 2 issues. So the first issue is holding Vladimir Putin to account, right? And I don't disagree this will be a long and laborious process. It's probably going to take years, if not decades, but it's important that it has to be done because it offers a way for Ukrainian victims to look Putin in the eye and hold him accountable for the crimes he's been committed.
What's the mechanism for it to be done? What is the
international...
what is the practical mechanism whereby we get Vladimir Putin into some
It's the
form of
International Criminal Court.
They don't recognise the International Criminal Court.
And he'd have to appear before it in person.
Well, and as we know, Putin clearly hasn't seen the sunlight in quite a while. But having said that, the International Criminal Court, all members are obliged to pick people up if they see someone that who has been wanted by the International Criminal Court to stand for war crimes. It's exactly what happened in Germany when victims of torture recognized a former Assad colonel, and he was made to stand trial and is now sentenced to life in prison. So justice is going to take a long time, but that doesn't mean we should cancel it out completely.
Okay. Great.
In terms of the actual question, the most important thing here is to make sure that Vladimir Putin does not succeed and that he loses and that he be made accountable for the absolutely appalling crimes committed by him, his coterie and his armed forces. I want to praise actually the journalists there on the ground. For example, Jeremy Bowen, the amazing reports on the News at 10 last night from Borodyanka, Mariupol, the reporting out of there, Irpin, all of these places, incredible, gripping accounts by journalists, really helping to document what has happened in real time. Second thing I said, in answer to the question earlier about our Prime Minister, if you listen to the Ukrainians, if you listen to President Zelensky, if you listen to who the Ukrainians say is most on their side, the name of Boris Johnson and the UK government crops up very, very frequently, both in terms of providing help, in terms of humanitarian aid. The UK is the largest bilateral donor to Ukraine, big amount of that on the humanitarian side. In terms of the weaponry that is being provided, a lot of the anti-aircraft missiles, a lot of the anti-tank missiles are coming from the UK. So if you listen to the Ukrainians, actually, it's them who are praising the UK as being one of the biggest donors. But in terms of the International Criminal Court, we've got to remember that only 20 years or so ago, Ratko Mladic, Radovan Karadzic, these characters were actually, a lot of them were actually brought to justice. I don't think we should have no faith in the International Criminal Court. I think we should have confidence in it, but we also have to make sure that Vladimir Putin actually does not win this conflict. It is essential both for the Ukraine and for international peace and security going forward, that a country that has launched such a blatant offensive, an old-style, early 20th century military offensive against its neighbour does not succeed. That is the most important thing in this.
Emily.
I think what we're seeing at the moment is we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of where the Russians have withdrawn, and then we see the complete abuse and the bodies, and we hear the stories. But there are many other towns and villages that are still under Russian control, and I hate to think the stories that we're going to hear coming out of those countries as well. But we're at a moment where they are recalibrating. We need to recalibrate as well. And whilst they withdraw and work out what they're going to do next, we need to make sure that we work out what we're doing next. And we've heard today a call from the Ukrainians for more weaponry. I think that we should be providing that. We should be providing that quickly. I think we should go the whole hog when it comes to sanctions. I think that we have done better than, frankly, we have ever done before in terms of sanctions against a major economy until now. But we can still go further, and we should be going further. And then, of course, we need to be collecting the evidence so that, yes, it'll take a long time, but we will hold them to justice.
Man there in the black T-shirt.
I think you're right. I've heard them say thank you, but for the last 6 weeks, I've also heard them say we need more help, we need more support. and I think that's a bit time that we should be given that.
Yeah. OK. The woman behind you.
Nobody wants a World War III. Nobody wants that at all. But we have Holocaust Day, where we remember the atrocities of World War II. The world is just sitting there looking. I so feel for President Zelensky. Every time he's on television, he's begging us to help. The people of Ukraine, I take my hat off to them. They are so cohesive. They are fighters. They are hard people. They need our help. If we were in their shoes, would we not be begging the rest of the world to help us? I cannot believe the scenes that I've seen on television. Talking, yes, talking's always good, but for somebody like Putin, he told us he wasn't going to invade, and he did. He's telling us that what we see on our televisions night after night, the awful rape, pillage, all of those things, we see it night after night. He tells us it's not happening. How can you talk to somebody that actually will just lie? Will he sign an agreement? Will he keep to it? I think not. We need to act now.
And what do you think we should do?
I think we should have closed the airspace before now. I think that should have been our first thing, or a lot sooner than now, that we should have done that.
Okay.
Definitely. And I think it's solution slightly at the moment, but actually the whole thing with passports and the Ukrainian people that want to come to Britain, I think that needs to be speeded up. And as people have said before, you know, take the system to Poland and do the processing there and bring them over. As Roger Gale, the local MP for here, suggested, use Munstone. There's the accommodation there. Use that as a centre to process them. You know, everything is taking too long. People
Can I
just
ask you a question about the no-fly zone, though? Because people say, I mean, Dan has just said, we should have a no-fly zone. But that does mean that we are committed to the RAF shooting down Russian planes and possibly bombing airfields in Russia. I mean, we need to be kind of aware of what it is that we're committing ourselves to.
But how far do we let him go? How many more people have to be killed, raped, civilians? How far does this actually go before more is done? How far do we let Putin go?
I think that we've stopped them in the tracks by what we
allow the Ukrainians to defend themselves. That has got to be the highest priority. I actually agree with Emily, and I think most military experts say it would be a dangerous course to try and enforce a no-fly zone, because almost inevitably the RAF would end up in direct conflict with Russian forces. The best thing is to do what we're doing, but to do more of it, which is to arm the Ukrainian forces with equipment to be able to defend themselves. Okay. And the enthusiasm for a lot of the British weaponry that's been given, particularly on the anti-aircraft and the anti-tank side, has been there for all to see from Ukrainian forces.
All right, let's move on. Let's take another question. From Richard Meacham. Where are you? Ah, there you are.
Good evening. Following the recent report on Rishi Sunak's wife over non-dom tax, is the Chancellor oblivious to the public's finances and struggles?
So this is a story that's broken last night, I think it was, or certainly earlier today. Rishi Sunak's wife has non-domiciled status, so she doesn't have to pay UK tax on income she earns abroad, and it is a considerable income of many millions of pounds that she earns abroad. It is entirely legal, it has to be said. You probably know more about this than anyone, Greg?
Well, I don't know about Rishi Sunak's wife's tax affairs, nor should I, because ultimately she is a private citizen. And I think it is wrong for us to be going down a road of attacking. I remember when Emily got attacked for what her husband does in the House of Commons, and the Speaker at the time rightly reprimanded.
He wasn't attacked, he's a judge, that's all.
Well, rightly reprimanded.
What a terrible thing to be, clearly.
But my point is...
I mean, Cherie Blair got quite a bit of stick, didn't she?
No, and I'm not supporting that. I'm saying we have to be really careful about what we say about politicians' spouses and relatives.
Well, do you think it's right that she should be a non-dom?
Well, as I understand it, if I understand her statement correctly, I've not met Rishi Sunak's wife, but her statement explains, if I'm not mistaken, she is an Indian national.
Got nothing to do with it.
It's impossible for her to be an Indian national and a dual national.
Doesn't
it's
matter.
impossible, according to her statement, that she could become a British national.
Doesn't matter.
Which means, according to her statement, she is inevitably going to be a non-dom.
No.
And that is, I think, she pays tax, as I understand it, on her UK income in the United Kingdom and pays tax on her non-UK income outside of the UK.
OK, you've got two
That
people
is
on
her
the panel
statement.
here shaking their heads.
No,
Which
no,
shall I pick? Emily, you're shouting the loudest.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't mean to shout, but it's just such nonsense, honestly. So you can have any passport you like. You know, if you're allowed to live in this country, you live in this country, and then you make a decision, a positive decision. Am I a permanent resident in this country, or am I only here temporarily? Because if you're only here temporarily, then you're a non-dom. And then you don't have to pay British taxes on all your income. So what we have is we have a woman living in Downing Street at taxpayers' expense who has, for tax reasons, said that she's not a permanent resident in the UK. That's where we are. And the reason that it's relevant and the reason that it's part of the ministerial code is because you can get a conflict of interest. The Chancellor of the Exchequer is responsible for the rules on non-doms.
But he has declared all this in his declaration of interest.
He is responsible for the rules on non-doms, and he has a missus at home who's not living there permanently. I mean, it's like, and for whatever reason,
what should she do?
Well, I think she should pay her taxes. I mean, that's what I think.
So you think, let's be clear, you think she should pay, so I've got the figures here, something. She would have earned, would have received, I think, £11.6 million in dividends from the company, the IT company started up by her father in the past tax year. Do you think, I mean, that was money earned
Well,
abroad.
it would help,
Do you think she
wouldn't
should
it?
have paid tax on that in the UK?
It would help. I mean, the truth is, right, is that the current system that we have is that ordinary working people are the ones who pay taxes in this country. You know, they're the ones who have to carry the burden. And, you know, there are far too many people, I think, who just take the mickey. You know, and who are not paying taxes in the way that I appreciate she's paying taxes, and I appreciate what she's doing.
She's not taking the mickey, she's paying
I
UK
appreciate
taxes.
that what she's doing is within the law, and I think we should change the law. I think we should change the law so that we have a fairer tax system.
OK. Dan.
To answer the question, I mean, I think there is clear evidence that Rishi Sunak is out of touch, but not because of his wife's tax arrangements. The reality is she, as I presume, like all of us in this room, is paying the amount of tax she is legally required to pay. The non-dom status, Emily says she thinks it should be abolished, fine, but governments of all persuasions, including the previous Labour government, had the opportunity to abolish it, didn't choose to do so. That's because this is not, as has been reported, a tax loophole. It is a long-standing principle of tax policy. Normally, in debates of this nature, we would see people such as Emily, I would guess most people in the audience, arguing why is it that foreign nationals, foreign corporations who make profits in the UK, why don't they pay tax in the UK? So it seems to me, if that's the principle here, then it seems to me a fair principle that if she earns her income outside of the UK, she should pay tax in those tax regimes. To go back to Rishi Sunak, the problem with Rishi Sunak is not Rishi Sunak's wife. The problem with Rishi Sunak is we have a Chancellor who has been too obsessed with his own personal brand. As a result of that, he has lost control of the economy. Inflation is soaring, debt is soaring, taxation is soaring, growth is anemic and predicted to be anemic. And he has lost control of the economy. But that is his fault. That is not his wife's fault.
Woman at the back in the glasses.
I would like to shift, the topic a little bit and talk about old-fashioned integrity. Don't people in a position of leadership need to lead by example? It's a matter of integrity, I think, and modelling the behaviour.
She's not in leadership. She's just married to someone who is.
Well, I fully appreciate that, but it's a bit disingenuous, to say the least, to have somebody who holds, public office, not to model the behaviour that we would all like to see, and that would, and not to hold the right standards of behaviour.
Okay, man next to you.
My understanding is the non-dom status expires after 15 years anyway, yet we've got no transparency here about how long this has been going on for, and surely that's a bigger question.
It's been going on for 8 years. 8
years. So if she's got nothing to hide, it's going on for a significant period of time, isn't it? Surely in 8 years you know where you want to live permanently, I would hope.
OK. A woman in the pink.
For me,
it's a clear matter of a conflict of interest, really. The man is setting the rules for the rest of the country for tax, and what actually makes someone a non-dom, the actual definition of a non-dom. I think possibly that's what should be looked at. She's living in number 10 with her husband, isn't she? But she's not domiciled in this country. That just seems to me wrong.
Can I just come in on that really quickly? So I never thought I would say this, but I'm in the exact same position as Rishi Sunak's wife, in that I'm a foreign national. Similarly to her, I can't give up my passport because my country doesn't allow for dual nationality. And yet I have absolutely no problem with paying tax on what I earn in the UK and beyond.
But so does she pays tax on what she earns in the UK. The issue is where she pays tax on income earned abroad.
But I think if she is resident in the UK, and she clearly is because she's living on Downing Street, she is making use of British infrastructure, she's sending her children to British schools, she's raising them in the UK, it is absolutely right that she should be paying in to contribute to the country.
She is.
But is she paying in on all her income? Because surely, if you spend most of your life living in the UK, it stands to reason that you should be paying tax on most of your income if you're spending your life here.
That's why the non-dom rules are there. To be clear, this government has tightened the non-dom rules very considerably from the last government under Labour, which had a total free-fall. It's actually we who introduced the 15-year limit. George Osborne introduced that limit, actually, in 2011.
All right, the man there in the jacket and blue shirt.
If Rishi Sunak wanted it, does this put a sort of scupper his plans of ever wanting to be Prime Minister of this country? I mean, and if so, it just seems we're at this point in time when you have a look at Partygate, and I know I've diverged a little bit there, but, with regards to a government where they're giving out one instruction and following something completely different.
OK. The woman behind you in the black cardi. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I read this story on the news and I was completely, I'm not even surprised anymore. Like, I expect this sort of behaviour. Like, as a young person getting into politics, like, it's so disappointing to hear how it's gotten. And, I can't trust politicians, and that's ridiculous. You're supposed to run our countries, but you hear about these stories about, you're not paying tax. That's, they're in charge. And the wife, the Exchequer's wife is not even...
wife, yeah.
Chancellor, thank you, is not even paying tax.
But she is. She is paying.
Well, she's not paying tax on the vast majority
yes,
of her
but
income.
it is important. She
It's
is
so
paying tax on her
disappointing.
UK
It's
income.
so disappointing.
Archbishop.
I think when we get it into personalities and individuals, we lose the plot because it just becomes political ping-pong. The point of tax is you pay for the benefit of living in a country. And whether you're a company or anyone else, you should pay, it seems to me, there are double tax treaties which stops you paying double taxation. I'm not talking about Rishi Sunak's wife, but there seems to be a real problem with the whole concept of non-dom status, or of companies that you can buy something here and they make the money here, but they charge it from Luxembourg or somewhere, and they don't pay tax on that. Yeah. There needs to be a real look at our tax system, because the basic principle is you pay for the benefit of living in the country to which you belong. When I first started work, because I couldn't get a job here, I got a job in France, and I paid, on my huge income of £2,200 a year, I paid...
Gosh, when was this, Justin?
Middle of the 17th century. I paid on my global income. Yeah. I paid French tax, but,
well, that sounds to me like you're saying...
We've had non-dom status for a very long time.
That sounds to me like you're saying, even though you don't want to get drawn into personality, that you think the Chancellor's wife should be paying
because she's
tax on her income
perfect.
here.
It is an old established rule, and a very good one, that you should not pay more tax than you are obliged to pay. You're perfectly entitled. It's a very old rule to fix your tax affairs legally, which she has done. So I'm not criticising her at all, but I just think the rules are wrong.
OK. Let's take another question on a much more local issue from Lucas. Lucas Warden.
Kent continues to see disruption as a result of both Brexit and recent issues with P&O. Should the government increase resources to prevent the county being turned into a car park?
Yes, and this has been going on for a few days. And is it 6 days in a row or something like that? That traffic has been longer than that. I can see a wry look from you, Archbishop. The traffic has been backed up along the motorway here. In fact, stretches of it were shut today. 23 miles of the M20 were shut, I think.
It took me 2 hours to get in here, like from Maidstone to it, and it usually only takes an hour. So I almost missed it.
Well, we're very glad you didn't. Dan?
I've got to be honest, it won't be a popular view. I'm not entirely sure this part of the world should necessarily get a degree of special treatment. I think that my understanding you touched on Brexit. My understanding, I was looking at the reports today, it seems to be the disruption today is as a result of P&O and the frankly sort of scandalous decision of P&O to sack its workforce. My understanding is the government.
But there were long traffic jams before that as well.
There were, but I'm just talking about what I've seen people today saying. Today's disruption, which is what we're talking about, is specifically as a result of the P&O issue. My understanding is the government is taking P&O to court on this and taking legal action over this. I hope they do. I hope they win. I think if anybody should be paying for the disruption that you're all experiencing, I think actually it should be P&O.
Yes, a few hands up. Yes, the man there in the blue shirt and grey jacket.
Yeah, I don't think this is just a recent P&O issue. This has been going on for a long time. I don't think enough's been done to provide any contingency plans. Yes, things happen at short notice, but we're left in gridlock. I've spent nearly 6 hours in my car unnecessarily this week just trying to get to and from work. There doesn't seem to be a plan.
OK, the man at the back there in the check shirt.
Good evening. I cannot understand why everything has to come through Dover. The gentleman earlier on mentioned the banks. Now, I think we need some entrepreneurs along with the banks. We've got the port of Sheerness, we've got the port of Ramsgate. Why aren't they used for ferries?
Right, so you want to spread the load, OK. Archbishop, we were talking just before we came on, actually, about the traffic around here and how bad it is.
Well, I agree with the question. I think, and it's been going on for more than 6 days on this occasion, but it's been going on for years for different reasons at different times. Every time it happens, everyone who has a small business can't get to work. Every time it happens, people can't get to hospital. The ambulances get held up. The roads get blocked. People take different routes. You find absolute chaos in towns near the main roads. And it does need support on that. There is no real sense that it's being gripped. We have to look at local communities and support them. They need extra resources.
Well, look, you've got the government represented here next to you. Why don't you tell them directly what you'd like?
What I'd like for Kent is more money for the county council, more places where the lorries can be stacked up other than on the roads, and decent provision for those who are stuck in their cabs of their lorries for a week at a time. So they've got toilets, so they got water, so they got food.
Well, Kent is an absolutely vital part of the country. It's a very densely, as you all know, a very densely populated part of the country, which is vital for our transport and our commercial links. And the government does recognise that very keenly. Where we are taking action is as Dan rightly pointed out, we're taking action on P&O. We're investigating whether they have created criminal offences. That is a very serious matter for a company.
Yes, the Prime Minister said in the House of Commons that the government would be taking P&O to court, I think. Is that actually happening?
Well, that is what we are looking at doing. We are also, in terms of putting in place new measures on hire and fire, although this was a case of just firing. It actually wasn't a hire and fire sort of case as such. But also, we've also talking about contingency plans. We've put in place Operation Brock, which is the use of the M20, the carriageway of the M20, as additional facility to put backed up lorries. I appreciate Justin saying that's not as good as a dedicated area, but it's still very, very helpful to have Operation Brock. That is what it's there for.
It blocks the entire county. I live on the A20 and you get 2-3 hour delays because you can't get because they've closed the motorway. It's ridiculous.
The motorway is not a car park.
everybody gets impacted because of it. It's a ludicrous plan.
Do you want to come back on it? Shall I go around?
It's a plan which we've had in place for some years now. We've operated it before, I think, effectively. It has been operated before late in 2020 when France closed the border with the Omicron variant, if I remember correctly. And it has been in operation before. But clearly we are looking at all available measures. Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, is very focused on this job, and we're taking really tough action on P&O as well. So I think we are doing the action.
It's easy to blame them. It's a lack of planning.
OK, let's let you go. I'll come back. I see lots of you shaking your head about Operation Brock. Let me get around the panel first quickly.
I think
Emily.
we've got a really fragile infrastructure because we had a deal with the European Union that was signed off on Christmas Eve, and it's got great big holes in it. And those holes really should have been patched since we'd signed that deal. But the ministers are missing in action. They don't seem to be getting down to patching these holes up. One of them is what's called a veterinary agreement. That is, sign a veterinary agreement, agree that you've got food the same standard as the rest of Europe, so that when a lorry driver goes across the channel, he doesn't have his ham sandwich confiscated. You know, it's that sort of thing that they really could do. It isn't just about ham sandwiches, let me tell you. It's about our food exports and about lorries being stopped and everything being checked, which just holds things up. So we're just about holding everything together. It's like stretched as much as it can, and then you get a little thing happen like Easter. You know, so lots more families want to go abroad. So then and then things start to fall apart, or you get P&O. I do think P&O is part of this too. And I have to say, I hear what's being said, that the government are looking into it. Well, stop looking into it and do something about it.
We are. We're taking action on P&O.
Taking action against P&O. You're talking about it. The Prime Minister said he was going to take them to court. I've written to the Attorney General and asked her, is that right? What law are you going to take them to court on? I've yet to have an answer on that. I'd like to know. And if the law isn't strong enough, we will support you in making the law stronger.
OK. So let's get back to the original question. Should the government increase resources to prevent the county, i.e. Kent, being turned into a car park?
I mean, it strikes me that using P&O is quite a convenient smokescreen from what clearly is quite long-standing issues that predate P&O. And I think what emerges really clearly is that people need infrastructure and they need support. They don't want their homes to be turned into gigantic car parks, and they don't want to see the long-term consequences of seeing that happen. Just think about how bad air quality is going to get if every day you have vehicles sat in traffic, running exhaust 3 to 4 hours a day. It's not going to be good, and it's going to affect the long-term health of people in the county. So it's about asking the government, what are you doing to mitigate the effects of that beyond taking P&O to court?
There's so many hands up, we're almost out of time. Let me just pick one of you. Yes, you're waving frantically at the back. Go on, then.
I live in the village of Merstham, which got land grabbed and had the big lorry park, and the Brexit thing put at the end of the village. We were the village that were lowering food down that Christmas. So we live this.
What do you mean you were lowering food down?
Christmas 2020, was it 21? I can't remember. But we were lowering food down to the poor lorry drivers that were backed up. So this is not new at all. And I'm also been on the news several times myself because the lost lorries, because the government didn't even give the right postcode to where those lorries should go. So there's a lot of work to be done. If you can't actually give the right sat-nav to these lorries, we had loads of them coming through the village, just tearing through the village. It's awful. And it's amazing how quickly land can be grabbed and things can be built when you want them to be.
Okay.
So let's get those.
All right, a lot of hands up, I'm afraid. I've got to end it there because our hour is up. Thank you very much to the panel for coming this evening. Thank you to all of you for coming along here tonight. And, of course, thank you to you at home for watching from Question Time in Canterbury. Bye-bye.